He only wanted her signature. That was all. No conversation, no explanation, no eye contact that lasted longer than a second. Lena set the pen down after she signed, and she noticed her hand wasn't shaking. She thought it would be. She had imagined this moment for 3 weeks, ever since the papers arrived via courier while she was making coffee on a Tuesday morning, and in every version of that imagined moment, her hand had trembled, but it didn't. Her hand was perfectly still, and that frightened her more than the papers themselves. "That's everything," said her husband's attorney, a thin man in a gray suit who collected the folder without looking at her. Her husband, Colton, was already standing, already moving toward the door. He paused at the threshold the way people pause before exiting a restaurant, just long enough to make sure they haven't forgotten anything. He hadn't forgotten anything. He'd planned this too carefully for that. "I hope you'll be comfortable," he said, without turning around. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say to that. Comfortable. 11 years of marriage, and that was the word he chose. She watched the door close behind him and sat alone in the conference room with the last cold inch of her coffee and the understanding that something inside her had just quietly ended. She drove home in silence. Not the peaceful kind. She had met Colton Mercer at a charity auction in Chicago when she was 28 years old. He was 41, already built, already polished in the particular way that money polishes people. Not flashy, just certain. He'd been certain about everything, including her. He'd told her on their third date that he intended to marry her. She had found this romantic at the time. Later she would understand that it wasn't romance. It was acquisition. She, Lena Whitmore, no, Mercer now, Whitmore again starting Monday, had given him 11 years. She'd left her job in architectural design at 30 because he'd asked her to. "I want you with me," he'd said. "I want us to build something together." What they'd built was his third company, which he'd leveraged into a real estate empire spanning 4 states. And she had been beside him at every dinner, every charity gala, every board retreat, where wives stood near the window with wine glasses and smiled on command. She had smiled. She had been so good at smiling. The fertility treatments had started at 33. His idea, framed as their idea, the way most of his ideas became their ideas somewhere between his mouth and her ears. 4 rounds, 4 failures. The specialist said there was no biological reason she shouldn't conceive. Colton had nodded gravely in that office and reached for her hand, and she had been so grateful for his hand that she hadn't asked why he looked, for just a moment, like a man who already knew the answer to a question no one had asked yet. She found out the truth 11 months after the divorce. Her sister Paige lived in a second-floor apartment in Wicker Park that smelled like lavender and takeout containers, and it was the only place Lena wanted to be in those first weeks. She slept on Paige's couch under a fleece blanket that had a cartoon owl on it, and she ate soup out of a can, and she let herself be terrible for a little while. Paige didn't ask her to be anything else. That was the gift of it. She got a job in October. Not a real job yet. A consulting position with a small firm downtown, part-time, enough to feel like herself again. She took the train. She wore her own name on her badge. The rhythm of it helped. She didn't know she was pregnant until December. She was standing in the pharmacy on Damen Avenue, looking at something completely unrelated. Cold medicine, she thought. Or maybe hand lotion. And she put the test in the basket almost without deciding to, the way you put something in a cart, because your hands moved before your brain caught up. She took it home and sat on the edge of Paige's bathtub and looked at the result for a long time. 2 lines. She did the math in her head 3 times. The last time with Colton had been in late February, just before everything fell apart. She had been tired and distracted, and he had been distant in that particular way she'd learned not to name. But it had happened. Apparently, it had happened. She sat on the edge of that bathtub for a very long time. When she came out, Paige was standing in the hallway holding a cup of tea like she'd known, which she probably had. Paige had always known things slightly before Lena did. She handed over the tea without a word and then sat down next to Lena on the floor, right there in the hallway, and they didn't talk for a while. "What do you want to do?" Paige finally said. "I don't know yet," Lena said, "but I think I'm keeping them." Paige looked at her. "Them? I don't know why I said that." Lena paused. "I just have a feeling." 3 weeks later, at her first OB appointment, the ultrasound confirmed it. 2 heartbeats. Small and fast and absolutely certain of themselves, the way new things are certain before the world gets to them. Twin girls. She did not tell Colton. She thought about it. She sat with it for 2 weeks, turning it over, examining it from every angle the way she used to examine building plans, looking for the load-bearing elements, the places where pressure would concentrate. She thought about what he would do. She thought about what he had already done. And then she thought about those 2 heartbeats, and she decided that some walls are built for protection, not concealment, and this was one of them. Her obstetrician, Dr. Okonkwo, was a calm woman with close-cropped hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she never once made Lena feel like a problem to be managed. She made her feel like a person making decisions, which was rarer than it should have been. At the 20-week appointment, after the anatomy scan came back healthy and clear, Lena cried in the car for 15 minutes. Not from sadness, from something else she didn't have a word for yet. The consulting work was growing. She'd taken on 3 new clients by January and was averaging more hours than a part-time position warranted, but she didn't mind. The work was clean. It made sense in the way that structures make sense. You understand where the weight goes. She started saving. She found a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she liked, with good light and a park 2 blocks away, and she signed a lease in February. She was 7 months pregnant when she moved in. Paige and 2 friends helped carry boxes. Nobody said anything about how tired she looked. They just kept handing her the lighter ones and pretending not to notice. She had met him at a zoning commission meeting in March, which was not a romantic setting by any standard. His name was Sebastian Hale, though he introduced himself as just Sebastian with the quiet confidence of someone who rarely needed to clarify. And he was 3 seats down from her on the public comment panel, there to advocate for an adaptive reuse project in the West Loop that his development firm had proposed. She was there representing one of her consulting clients. He spoke for 4 minutes. She spent most of those 4 minutes telling herself she was evaluating his argument, which she was, but she was also evaluating other things. He was maybe 45, dark-haired with early gray at the temples, and he had the kind of face that looked better up close than from a distance, which she thought was a good sign about a person's character, though she couldn't have explained why. Afterward, in the hallway, he'd held the door and then said, "Your point about the drainage easements was the best thing said in there." She'd looked at him. "You were listening? I was listening to everything," he said. Then he'd handed her his card and walked to the elevator, and she'd stood there holding the card and feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, which was simple, uncomplicated interest. She didn't call him for 3 weeks. She was 37 weeks pregnant, and not particularly inclined to introduce that complication to someone she'd met at a zoning hearing. But he called her first, professionally, about a project, and then they talked for an hour, and then he called again. By the time her daughters were born, 7 pounds 1 ounce and 6 pounds 14 ounces, on a Wednesday morning in April, healthy and loud, Sebastian knew about them. He'd known for a month. She had told him the same way she told him most things, directly, without preamble, watching his face for the flicker of retreat, that she was certain would come. It didn't come. "Okay," he'd said. "When are you due?" That was it. "When are you due?" Not "I should probably give you some space," or "that's a lot to take on," or any of the other gentle exits she had prepared herself for. Just, "When are you due?" As if it were simply information to be incorporated, like a change in meeting time. She went into labor on a Tuesday night. Paige drove her to the hospital. Sebastian was in London for a project review, and she hadn't told him she was in early labor because she hadn't wanted to make it something it wasn't yet. But somehow, she found out later that Paige had texted him. He landed at O'Hare at 6 in the morning and came straight to the hospital still in his travel clothes, carrying coffee for Paige and a small stuffed rabbit he'd found in an airport shop, and he sat in the waiting room until she was ready for visitors. Her daughters were 6 hours old when he first met them. He stood in the doorway of the recovery room and looked at her holding both of them. She was exhausted, still pale, her hair a disaster, and he said, "You look incredible," and she knew he meant it. "You came from London," she said. "I was already flying back," he said, which was partially true. She had been home from the hospital for 9 days when Colton found out. She still wasn't sure how. Her best guess was a former colleague who'd seen a congratulatory post on Paige's social media, though Paige had locked the settings. It didn't matter, in the end, how the information traveled. What mattered was that at 8:15 on a Thursday morning, her phone rang with a number she recognized and hadn't seen in almost a year. She didn't answer. He called 3 more times that day. On the 4th call, she picked up. "Is it true?" he said. No greeting. "Good morning, Colton." "Is it true?" he said again. "What specifically are you asking?" A pause. "Are they mine?" She looked at her daughters, asleep in the double bassinet across the room. Small faces, small fists, the particular profound stillness of newborns at rest. "That's something you'd need a lawyer to ask me formally," she said, "so I'd recommend you start there." She hung up. She called her own attorney that afternoon. His name was Edmund Aldridge, a quiet man in his 60s, who had handled her divorce with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by very little. She told him about the call. He listened without interrupting. "I need to know our position," she said. "Your position is strong," he said. "The divorce was finalized before you knew about the pregnancy. There was no fraud on your part. He'll claim paternity rights. That's his legal avenue. And the papers I signed in the divorce, the settlement agreement? Standard. He waived any claim to future assets. The children's existence doesn't alter that on his end. But he can pursue a paternity suit, which would establish his rights and obligations regardless. What do I do?" "You document everything. You don't speak to him directly again. And you let me handle the contact." She did all 3 of those things. Colton filed within 2 weeks. The paternity petition arrived on a Friday, and Lena read it twice at the kitchen table while the twins slept. And she noticed something in the language, a specific clause, almost buried in the standard legal phrasing, that made her call Edmund immediately. "He's claiming the fertility treatments were conducted under false pretenses," she said. "He's suggesting I concealed information that affected our ability to conceive." Edmund was quiet for a moment. "I saw that. What does that mean?" "It means his attorney is laying groundwork. If he can establish that the fertility failures were connected to something you did or didn't disclose, he can muddy the paternity issue and potentially argue entrapment." She set the papers down carefully on the table. "I never concealed anything. I went to every appointment. I did every round they recommended." He was the one who... She stopped. Something had been in the back of her mind for a long time. Since a conversation she'd had with Dr. Okonkwo at the 12-week appointment, when the doctor had asked routine questions about her medical history, and Lena had mentioned the previous fertility treatments. And Dr. Okonkwo had paused in a way that doctors pause when something doesn't quite align. "Did your previous specialist ever run a full panel on both partners?" He said his results were normal. "Did you see the results yourself?" She hadn't. She had trusted him. She had trusted all of it. She called Dr. Okonkwo that afternoon, asked if she could come in, not for an appointment, just to talk. The doctor met her on a Tuesday during a lunch break, in her office that smelled like paper and the particular clean antiseptic scent of a medical building. Lena explained what she was wondering about. Dr. Okonkwo listened, and then she said, very carefully, "I can't speak to what another practice did or didn't do, but I can tell you that in cases where a patient presents with 4 consecutive failed cycles and no identified biological cause on the female side, the male factor testing is usually where the answer is found. And if those results were normal, the question becomes whether normal was the correct characterization, or whether it was the result someone wanted to report." Selena drove home and sat in her car for 20 minutes before going inside. She hired an investigator. She didn't tell Edmund about it right away. She knew he would tell her to wait, and she was done waiting. His name was Terrell, a compact man in his early 50s who came recommended by a colleague of Sebastian's, and he charged by the hour and never asked unnecessary questions. It took him 11 days. What he found was not complicated. It was just devastating. Colton had been receiving monthly treatments from a private clinic in Evanston. Hormone suppressant injections, documented, paid through an account Lena had never had access to, started approximately 4 months into their marriage. The clinic had been discreet. The invoices had gone to a P.O. box registered under a subsidiary of one of his holding companies. The doctor who administered the treatments had since retired and moved out of state, but the records existed, because records always exist somewhere if you know where to ask. He had known from the beginning that he couldn't give her children. No, that wasn't exactly right. He could, biologically, under different circumstances. But he had chosen not to. He had chosen systematically and deliberately to prevent it. He had watched her go through 4 rounds of injections and monitoring and hope and loss, and he had never said a word, because children were not part of what he was building. She was what he was building. The version of her that attended his dinners and smiled at his colleagues and needed him for the shape of her life. Lena read Terrell's report at the kitchen table, with her daughters in the bassinet beside her, and she felt something move through her that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but something older than both of them, something that had been waiting in the basement of her for a long time. She forwarded the report to Edmund. He called her within the hour. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. This isn't just grounds for emotion against his paternity claim. If this is verified, and I believe it can be, this is fraud perpetrated throughout the marriage. We can move to have the divorce settlement reviewed. We can pursue damages. Lena." He paused. "He didn't just fail you. He committed financial and emotional fraud against you over the course of a decade." "I know," she said again. "Are you all right?" She looked at her daughters. The older one, Margot, she'd named her, was making the small searching face she made before she decided whether to cry. The younger one, Bet, was simply asleep, with the vast uncomplicated certainty of someone who had never been lied to. "I will be," she said. Colton's attorneys moved quickly once Edmund filed. They contested the authenticity of the clinic records. They questioned the investigator's methodology. They submitted a counter-motion arguing that Lena had herself withheld information relevant to the fertility process, though they couldn't specify what that information was because it didn't exist. It took 4 months. What helped was Sebastian. Not in a rescue sense. She was clear-eyed enough by then to know the difference between help and rescue, and what he offered was the former. He didn't try to insert himself into the legal proceedings, or make himself the protagonist of something that was her story. He came over on the evenings when she was too tired to think and made dinner, which he was better at than she was. And he held Bet while Lena handled Margot, and on the nights when she sat at the kitchen table after the twins were down and stared at papers until the words blurred, he sat with her and didn't tell her to come to bed until she was ready. "You don't have to stay," she told him once, near midnight when the apartment felt very quiet and very small. "I'm aware," he said from the other side of the table where he was reading something on his phone. She looked at him. "I mean, this is a lot. 2 babies and a lawsuit, and this is a lot for someone who just met me at a zoning meeting." He set his phone down. "I know what I signed up for, Lena. You didn't sign up for anything. That's my point." "Then I know what I'm choosing," he said. "Which is different and also sufficient. So can we let that be the end of it?" She laughed, which surprised her. She hadn't laughed in a while. He smiled at the laugh, which made her laugh again, and that was the night she understood that this was not temporary. The ruling came on a Thursday morning in August. Edmund called her at 9:47. She was feeding Bet. She had to put her phone on speaker and hold it between her shoulder and her cheek while she managed the bottle, which was not the most dignified way to receive legal news. But life rarely offers dignity on a convenient schedule. The family court judge had reviewed the full case, including the clinic records, which had been independently verified by a forensic accountant and a medical board examiner. The court found the records credible and the pattern of behavior consistent with deliberate reproductive fraud. Colton's paternity claim was not dismissed. He was the biological father, and the court was not in the business of erasing biology. But his petition for custodial rights was denied on the grounds that his conduct in marriage demonstrated a pattern of deliberate deception that constituted a material threat to the children's emotional and psychological welfare. He would pay child support. He would have no legal access. He had also been notified that the state's attorney's office was reviewing the clinic records for potential criminal referral. Edmund had made certain of that. Her divorce settlement was being reopened for review. There would be more proceedings. It would take time, but Edmund's voice, always measured, had a particular quality that morning that she recognized as the closest he ever got to satisfied. "He's not untouchable," Edmund said. "He was just very careful for a very long time. And now," she said, "and now the records exist, and the records always exist somewhere." She set the bottle down. Bet made the brief, indignant sound she made when interrupted mid-feeding. Lena picked the bottle back up and looked out the window at the park 2 blocks away, visible through the gap between buildings, where the August trees were still green and full. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it. That's what I'm here for," Edmund said, and hung up. 6 months later, on a Saturday in February, Sebastian's daughter from his first marriage, a 21-year-old named Clover, who was studying environmental law at Northwestern, and had the particular sharp humor of someone raised by a man who appreciated directness, came over for lunch and held Margot for an hour, while Margot investigated Clover's earring with the focused gravity of a scientist. "She's basically already doing peer review," Clover said. "She's very critical," Lena said. "We encourage it." Sebastian was in the kitchen making something that involved too many dishes. Bet was asleep in the other room. The February light was thin and clear through the windows, and the apartment smelled like garlic and coffee and the particular warm scent of a home that has infants in it, which is one of the better smells once you're in it. At some point, Sebastian brought food to the table and the 4 of them ate, and it was ordinary in the way that good things usually are, which is to say it was exactly what it looked like. A Saturday, a table, people who had chosen each other, and she thought about the conference room 18 months ago, the cold coffee, the man who couldn't hold eye contact while she signed away 11 years. She thought, "I built the wrong things for a long time." She thought, "I'm not building wrong anymore." Margot grabbed a fistful of Clover's hair. Clover laughed. Sebastian reached over and pried the tiny fingers loose, gently, one by one, and said something low and fond to both of them that Lena didn't quite catch but understood completely. She didn't need to hear the words. She already knew what they meant.